Hello and welcome to the show. Before we begin, apologies. It's also another out and about recording, so expect some noisy distractions in the background. Yesterday, we looked at whether it's realistic to expect customers to pick up the phone, potential customers, clients that we're working with, whether it's realistic to expect them to pick up the phone whenever we call. And the answer we came to was maybe, and it could be a yes or a no, depending on the circumstances. But one of the ideas that I pushed forward is that if you're able to set expectations and an agenda beforehand, then you're more likely to get people to answer the phone when you call. And that's what we're going to tackle today, how to get people to pick up the phone. And we do that by setting expectations and agendas beforehand. And if you remember from the previous episode, that's because people don't like being bothered. And so if people have a sense of why it is that you are calling, then they're most likely going to answer. Now, for private relationships, like if I'm calling my mom, of course she's going to answer regardless. But for the average person, it's like Tavashima is calling me. The call seems to be out of the blue. I have no idea what this is about. The person is not going to want to interrupt whatever it is that he's doing at the moment, whether it's work related or even if it's Netflix. And it's just because there's no prior context or background, any reason why he should pick up the call. And so that's the reason why setting expectations and delivering an agenda beforehand is absolutely important. Now, when do you set those expectations and the agenda? You do that now before you make the next call. And by the way, in the previous podcast and this one, we are looking at circumstances where you do have some form of prior relationship with the person. Remember, we're talking about customers or potential customers or actual clients. So these are people that you've had some conversations with before, and we're trying to be much more effective with getting them to answer the phone call in the future so that we can advance the relationship, advance the sale, or pursue whatever ultimate agenda that we have in mind. Now, with that background, now that I hope I've delivered that context, that these are people that we've had a prior relationship with, there's something that you guys ought to remember. For those of you who have been listening to the podcast from the very get, you already know this. But for newbies, there's something called qualification, or the idea that you have to be talking to a qualified person. So in this case, since we're talking about the business context, we want to be sure that people have a want or a need for the product or service that we provide, that they can afford what it is that we're trying to sell, and that there's a sense of urgency, which means that they're ready to take action at a reasonably determined time in the future. So it's also another assumption here that we're dealing with qualified people. Because if we're dealing with someone who is not qualified, in other words, the person doesn't want your product, they don't need your service, you're too expensive, and they're not ready to go ahead now, they're thinking of making a decision next month, maybe next year, maybe in 3 years, or maybe never. Those kind of folks, you will not be able to get them to answer the phone at all because they don't want, they don't need, they're not interested, you're too expensive, and besides, they're not ready to take a decision anyway. So, if you're selling the latest and greatest, let's say skating shoes, for instance, you think that skating is going to take off as a hobby in Nigeria, and so you have your skating rink and you sell skating shoes as well, and you're moving around the people's office and you're trying to get them to sign up their kids for that. So let's see, want or need. You're talking to someone who is not interested in skating himself, and maybe his kids are maybe 3 and 1. So in that case, there's no sense of urgency. It's a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. It's going to be another 3 or 4 years before they're interested in skating. The man doesn't want to start skating himself. His wife is not interested in skating. And by the way, you're selling it at 15,000 per week. They think that that's extremely expensive. That kind of person is not going to answer your phone call. But then, if you're talking to the father or the mom, the children are teenage, let's say 13 and 10, and they have a bit of money. After all, it's only 15K per week, and the children's holiday is coming up in a week. It might be something they will look into. Like, okay, it's only 15K for the two kids, that's 30K. They might do it. So you might be able to get them to answer the phone call if you set the expectations and the agenda beforehand. So we have to be dealing with qualified people. Remember, person is qualified if the person has a want or a need, if they can afford what it is that we're talking about, and if there's a sense of urgency. Urgency is really important. It shows that they might be taking a decision anytime soon. So if you're having a conversation with a qualified person now, then you have to set expectations for the next meeting or the next call. And you do that simply by saying something like, okay, now, okay, Mr. Bayo, now that we're settled with XYZ, next week, next week, Wednesday, I'm going to call so that we can work on Y. Does that work for you? So that's just a simple formula. So back to this example, in this case, we're going to say, okay, now, Mr. Bayo, that you and Madam think it's a good idea for Tayo and Kende, your children, to start skating lessons. I'm going to call you guys next week, Wednesday, so you can come over to the studio so that we can do fitting for the shoes that we're going to order for your kids. Is that fine by both of you? And they're going to say either yes or they're going to say no. If they're going to say yes, then that's cool. If you call next week, Wednesday, the chances that they're going to answer the phone will be high. If they say no, try and see it's probably because they want to reschedule, or maybe you missed something during the qualifying stage of the relationship. Maybe they don't want to go ahead after all. But bottom line is this: if they say yes, the chances are that if they answer the phone, it's going to be high. So remember, the formula is very simple. Now that we've settled on XYZ, I'm going to call you next week, tomorrow, blah blah blah, so that we can work on ABC. Does that work for you? Something like that. Now, in this situation, what happens if you call on Wednesday and they don't answer? For those of you who are based in Northern Europe and America and those sorts of countries, you guys still have a voicemail culture, so leave a voicemail. There are voicemail transcription services that are going to deliver, I think, via SMS if they don't answer, so they'll get to see that you sent, that you tried calling and you left a voicemail. So that's a good little prompt. But for those of us here in Africa, Nigerians, Ghanaians, South Africans, and I hear that even in South America as well, we have more of an SMS, WhatsApp, and Telegram culture. So you can leave voicemails from now until the end of eternity, but the average Nigerian person does not check his voicemail. In fact, the average Nigerian person has not activated his voicemail, and as I'm speaking with you guys right now, I don't even know how to activate the voicemail service on my phone. I only know one person who does. That's my good friend Aibe. We used to be roommates back in Aberdeen, and well, he's a voicemail person. He's the only Nigerian I know who, if you call him, he goes straight to voicemail, and you can leave your voicemail. But I don't leave voicemails for him because I'm not sure if he listens to them anyway, so I just send a message. So if you're in Northern Europe, America, voicemail is your thing. If you are African, if you're South American, then SMS, WhatsApp, and Telegram. And the template is something similar. You're going to give an appropriate greeting, you're going to say what your intention is, and then you're going to move to close or give them a call to action. Now, let me repeat. For those of us who are based in Africa, yeah, that's the template. Appropriate greeting, state your intention, and then give them a call to action. So that would be something like, hello, this is Alex from ABC Company. I called earlier to discuss XYZ as we agreed. Let me know when you're available to talk, and I'll call you back. Now remember, this only works for qualified prospects. Let me put it that way. People who are qualified for us to continue in this relationship with. So back to the skating example, it will be something like this. So let's say it's the mom you called. So it's going to be, hello, Mrs. Shagun. This is, okay. I've forgotten the example. Okay, so hello, Mrs. Shagun. This is Kende from last week. I called earlier to discuss your children's sizing before we order their shoes. Let me know when you're available to talk, and I'll call you back. So that's a simple SMS, WhatsApp, Telegram message that you can send. The woman is going to see it. Or if you call the husband is going to see it as well. And then they know that they have to get back to you because you guys have a previous agenda that you guys haven't concluded upon. So if you follow this simple framework, that should be a basic way to avoid people, to get people to stop ghosting you and to get people to pick up the phone. So remember, we're setting expectations and agenda beforehand. We're doing that now at this current meeting before we call them tomorrow or next week or whatever. And this only works if you're dealing with someone who is qualified. Qualified means the person is interested. They won't have a want, they have a need, they can afford what you have, and there's a sense of urgency. If the person is not qualified, there's very little you can do to get the person on the phone. And even if the person answers the phone, there's very little chance that the relationship is going to move in any concrete way for both of you, because they're not interested, they can't afford, and they're not close to making a decision anytime soon. So thank you very much for listening to today's episode. I'll catch you guys at the next recording.